Sustainable procurement is a process whereby governments and other public organizations, such as local municipalities, public companies, or international organizations, buy things. They might be buying products, services, or construction works. In that process, they prioritize purchasing of products or services that have the most social, environmental, and economic impact possible over the entire life cycle. This approach can be characterized as taking a long-term perspective on the consequences of public buyers' purchasing decision. Even deciding whether to buy a new fleet of buses for public transport in a city, or whether it is possible to repair or upgrade the existing fleet, can be accounted for already as a valid part of sustainable decision-making. Procurement law regulates this process, and we can distinguish three levels of a regulation: national, regional, and international. Let's start with national level. This could be Danish, Australian, Brazilian, etc. Procurement Law Act. Depending on the country's administrative structure, national regulation can also be divided into federal and state level in federal countries. On the national level, procurement acts often refer to the need for efficient spending of public money, or economic efficiency, reference to achieving so-called value for money, and also ensuring integrity of the process or probity of the process. Second level we can refer to as regional or so-called supranational. This is very specific to the EU and it's connected with the unique character of European law. The EU level of procurement regulation is based on EU public procurement directives. The objective of EU procurement law is to secure internal market by ensuring equal access for all operators within the internal market to procurement opportunities in other member states, as well as fair, open competition for public contracts. Third level of regulation is the international one, and it can include multilateral or bilateral trading agreements that include provisions on procurement. An example here can be a World Trade Organization's governmental procurement agreement, which aims to mutually open government procurement markets among its member parties. By the member parties here, we would understand the countries that are member of the agreement. Those three levels represents part of the complex legal framework of procurement law. It is worth adding that international financial institutions such as World Bank or various development banks will have their own procurement regulations. The next aspect to consider is what is the scope of procurement law? Procurement law defines who are public organizations that are obliged to use the rules, what is understood as public contract, and the law also lays down a set of procedural rules that establishes a condition or conditions for awarding public contracts. Next, we need to ask ourselves, what is the relationship between sustainability and procurement law? Sustainability is largely a policy goal. Therefore, as a starting point, I would like to talk about the broader approach to pursuing policies through public procurement. Here we can approach the topic from two perspectives. According to the first perspective, public procurement is primarily seen as economic activity. The focus is on efficient spending, which is understood as ensuring that the government gets the most bang for its buck, so to speak. In this approach, policies are perceived as so-called horizontal or secondary aims to achieve. So-called nice to have, but not crucial to have. The secondary policies may include environmental consideration, such as reducing CO2 emission, social policies, such as reducing unemployment, or industrial development aims, such as promotion of small and medium enterprises. In principle, the governments can pursue any policy objectives as long as they fit within the primary economic objectives and the internal market open competition goals in the EU context, when we're talking about European procurement, aims, goals, and regulations. The second perspective emphasizes the public nature of public procurement. That means that governments are not geared to achieve profit in strictly economic terms as such. Whether the purchasing is being made, it has a public function. We conduct procurement to construct a building for it to be a public school and provide education. We buy medicine to provide healthcare in hospitals. We purchase transport services to assist vulnerable members of our community in getting to the doctors or to deliver food to them. Governments are all entrusted with the preservation of societies and ensuring good governance. Consequently, an argument can be made that sustainable development is to underline any government activity, including procurement, recognizing sustainability in public procurement as a strategic goal rather than as a secondary. Instrumentalization of procurement is not a new phenomenon. Over the decades, public procurement has been used as a policy lever. One of the most famous examples is the aftermath of the 1929 crisis during the New Deal era and Roosevelt presidency in the US. The major piece of legislation was erected titled National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. That is when the idea that procurement is not an end to itself, but rather a means to achieve, for example, societal goals was born. So now that we know that policy has been and still is largely present in public procurement, the question might be posed where the tension between pursuing sustainability in public procurement is. Or in other words, what is the problem? The criticism against incorporating sustainability objectives extensively in public procurement focuses on potentially increasing prices and transaction costs without transparent and evident proof. To answer that criticism, we can point out that it matters how we look at price. Yes, LED light bulbs will be more expensive to purchase, but they will last longer and contribute to decrease in electricity bills, making them cheaper to purchase in the long term. Regarding proof of sustainable public procurement achieving its goal, it is true that public authorities still do not follow up and collect enough data of finished projects to showcase the project's outcomes and the goals achieved. However, I believe it's worth pointing out that this is a general issue in public procurement, if it is sustainable or not. Public buyers do not audit enough to ensure that the perceived savings that procurement design was promising were actually delivered. Consequently, this is a general problem that must be addressed under procurement law. Some arguments point out that sustainability policy in procurement might be used as a smokescreen for preferential treatment of specific suppliers and therefore narrow or even distort competition. This argument is particularly present in the context of EU procurement law, whether there is a prohibition of local preference. Yes, we imagine that if we want to procure most sustainable food, our first thought might immediately assume that it will mean local food. Nevertheless, there are various studies show that sustainability does not always mean local. Let's take example of tomato. Tomato locally produced in cold Nordic country under greenhouse will need potentially much more energy and water consumption to be spent than tomato that is produced in warm southern country transported to the mentioned Nordic country via train. Lastly, there is a need to differentiate between national protectionist practices and the EU or even global wide sustainable objectives to which procurement also should contribute. Challenges such as climate change emergency do not have boundaries. Therefore, they are not specific to one country or another.